What if the strongest part of you is also what they used to destroy you? You think you've escaped. You understand gaslighting. You know the signs. You've come so far, but then a text, a chance meeting, and everything crashes down. Not because you're weak, because they've seen something you haven't dared to face your darkness. When a narcissist sees the shadow side of an empath, it only takes one trick to make you question your entire sanity. Stacy is a powerful empath. 2 years after leaving her narcissistic ex, she began teaching self-worth, writing about healing, helping others find their light. Until one day, he came back. Just one sentence. I always knew you weren't as kind as you pretended to be. No anger, no threats. Just one sentence. Like a knife that pierced exactly where it hurt most. Stacy knew it was manipulation. She'd studied this. She'd healed from this. But why did it still break her open? Why did shame flood through her body like poison? She had integrated so much light, but the unintegrated shadow was still there, and somehow he knew exactly how to hit it. Have you ever felt this? That sickening moment when someone sees a part of you that you've spent years trying to heal and uses it against you. That's not weakness. That's what happens when your shadow hasn't been welcomed home yet. Carl Jung said, "The brighter the persona, the darker the shadow." This is the cruel paradox of the empath. You've spent your entire life being the light, the healer, the understanding one, the person who shows up when everyone else disappears. But somewhere underneath, buried beneath years of people-pleasing and emotional labor, is a part of you that you dare not admit exists. The exhaustion of always being good, the resentment of being used while others take freely, the quiet jealousy when you watch selfish people protect their energy while you drain yourself empty, the rage at having to understand everyone while no one tries to understand you. This isn't your weakness. This is your humanity. But when you haven't integrated these feelings, when you've labeled them as bad and pushed them into the darkness, they become the perfect gateway for manipulation. The narcissist doesn't need to break you down with obvious cruelty. They just need to awaken your Carl Jung shadow before you're ready to face it yourself. They whisper, "You're not who you pretended to be," and suddenly your inner critic screams, "What if they're right? What if I'm not actually good? What if I'm just as selfish and cruel as everyone else?" Let me tell you about Tom. Successful therapist, devoted father known in his community as the guy who would drop everything to help anyone in need. His narcissistic mother had been out of his life for 3 years. He'd done the work, therapy, boundaries, healing. He felt strong. Then she called on his birthday. "I know you think you're this enlightened person now," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "But I remember when you screamed at me. I remember how cruel you could be. That's still who you are underneath all this spiritual pretending." Tom hung up the phone and couldn't stop shaking, because she wasn't entirely wrong. He had screamed at her. He had been cruel as a teenager, desperate and trapped, lashing out at the person who was slowly destroying his sense of self. But he'd never forgiven himself for those moments. He'd built his entire identity around being different, being better, being the opposite of everything she was. And in one sentence, she dragged him back into that shame. This is the shadow trap. You become so afraid of your own darkness that you give others the power to weaponize it against you. You react with such violence to being called selfish, not because you are selfish, but because you've never allowed yourself to be selfish, not even in healthy ways. You panic when someone questions your kindness because you've never integrated the parts of you that sometimes don't want to be kind. And narcissists. They have a sixth sense for this. They can smell unintegrated shadow from across the room. They know that the more desperately you need to be seen as good, the more easily they can control you by threatening that image. Take a moment and ask yourself, what part of your personality do you most fear being accused of? What would absolutely devastate you to have someone say about you? That's your shadow calling. That's the part of you that's been exiled, waiting to be reclaimed. Because here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that holds your power. The empath who never allows themselves to be selfish becomes a doormat. The person who never lets themselves feel anger becomes a perpetual victim. The one who can't acknowledge their own darkness becomes prey to those who can see it clearly. When you reject parts of yourself, you hand others the keys to your destruction. Here's the truth that will revolutionize your understanding of manipulation. You don't fall apart because they hurt you. You fall apart because you've been hiding the parts of yourself that are still hurting. Carl Jung called this shadow projection when someone's comment hits a piece of your psyche that you haven't integrated yet, haven't made peace with, haven't brought into the light of your conscious awareness. They don't attack your weak spots. They attack the parts of you that you deny belong to you. They call you manipulative, and you lose your absolute mind. Not because you're manipulative in some evil way, but because you've never allowed yourself to acknowledge the subtle ways you do try to control outcomes through your kindness, your helpfulness, your people-pleasing. They say you're selfish and you spiral into days of self-hatred, not because you're pathologically selfish, but because you've never given yourself permission to have normal, healthy self-interest, to want things, to prioritize your own needs sometimes. They accuse you of being fake, and your entire world collapses not because you're fake, but because you've been so terrified of being authentically yourself that you've lost touch with who you really are underneath all the performance. This is the reality reversal game that skilled manipulators play. They don't gaslight you with obvious lies that you can easily dismiss. They gaslight you with uncomfortable truths about parts of yourself you're not ready to own. Then they sit back and watch you tear yourself apart, trying to prove them wrong. Because here's the twisted psychology that most people never understand. Once you're in a position where you have to prove that you're good, you've already lost the game. Good people don't have to prove they're good. They just are. They know they're human. They know they're flawed, and they know they're still worthy of love and respect. But when you're carrying unintegrated shadow material, when you're secretly terrified that maybe you aren't as good as you try to be, you become desperate to maintain that perfect image. And desperation makes you completely controllable. Let me tell you about Mary. She'd spent 2 years in intensive therapy after leaving her emotionally abusive partner. She understood codependency, trauma, bonding, attachment wounds, all of it. She'd done EMDR, somatic therapy, inner child work. She felt healed, strong, ready to trust again. Then she started dating someone new, someone who seemed different, emotionally available, kind, conscious. He talked about therapy and growth and communication. He seemed like everything her ex wasn't. 3 months in, during their first real conflict, she'd asked him to help more with household tasks. He said something that stopped her cold. You know, you have this way of making everything about your trauma and your needs. It's actually pretty selfish. Other people have problems too, but you just center yourself in every conversation. Mary knew this was unfair. She knew she wasn't making everything about her trauma. She'd been so careful, so balanced, so considerate of his needs and feelings. But the comment hit something deeper. Because there was a tiny part of her that wondered, was she being too much? Was she taking up too much space with her healing journey? Had her focus on recovery made her self-absorbed in ways she couldn't see? She spent the next week apologizing, minimizing her needs, proving how considerate she could be. She stopped talking about her therapy sessions. She stopped asking for help. She made herself smaller and smaller, trying to show him she wasn't selfish. It took her months to realize she'd been masterfully manipulated, not with lies, but with a grain of truth twisted into a psychological weapon. Because yes, healing does require a certain amount of self-focus. Yes, trauma recovery means centering your own experience for a while. Yes, asking for what you need can feel selfish when you've spent your whole life putting everyone else first. But owning that reality, integrating that truth about the necessary selfishness of healing would have made her completely immune to the manipulation. Instead, she rejected that part of herself, and it became her point of maximum vulnerability. This is why shadow work isn't just psychological luxury or spiritual bypassing. It's emotional survival in a world full of predators. When you've integrated your darkness, when you've made peace with the full spectrum of who you are, manipulation bounces off you like water off glass. Someone says you're selfish. Sometimes I am. We all are. That's part of being human with needs and desires. They call you angry. I can be. Anger often shows me where my boundaries have been crossed. It's valuable information. They accuse you of being fake. I'm learning to be more authentic every day. Thanks for pointing out where I might still be performing. No defensiveness. No desperate need to prove them wrong. No 3-hour conversations trying to justify your character. Just calm acknowledgement of your full humanity. But when you're split off from parts of yourself, when you're terrified of your own shadow, every accusation feels like a death threat to your carefully constructed identity. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The narcissist who triggers you isn't showing you who you are. They're showing you who you're afraid you might be. And that fear, that desperate need to be perfect, to never be those rejected things, becomes the very mechanism that controls you. Here's something most people don't understand about narcissistic abuse. It's not really about them being evil monsters. It's about them being completely unconscious of their own Carl Jung shadow, so they project it onto you. They make you carry their disowned shame, their rejected vulnerability, their hidden self-hatred. They can't face these things in themselves, so they dump them onto the nearest empath who will accept the projection. And if you haven't done your own shadow work, you'll accept that projection. You'll carry it as if it belongs to you. You'll apologize for their disowned emotions and try to heal their rejected parts. But the moment you recognize the game, the moment you see that their accusations are really confessions, their judgments are really projections, everything changes. You stop taking responsibility for their disowned emotions. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who is fundamentally incapable of seeing it. You stop giving your power away to people who are terrified of their own. The manipulation only works when you're afraid of your own darkness. When you've made peace with your shadow, there's literally nothing left for them to weaponize against you. Healing isn't about becoming perfect. Healing is about becoming real. It's when you can look in the mirror and say, yes, I've been angry. Yes, I've been selfish. Yes, I've been petty and jealous and small. Yes, I am human. And no one can manipulate you with that truth anymore. Stacy, remember her, started keeping what she called a shadow journal. Instead of her usual gratitude lists and positive affirmations, she began writing the things she'd never allowed herself to feel. I'm tired of being everyone's emotional support system. I sometimes feel superior to people who haven't done as much inner work as me. I used to fantasize about my ex getting hurt the way he hurt me. I'm jealous of people who can be openly selfish without feeling guilty. Sometimes I don't want to be understanding. Sometimes I just want to be angry. At first, writing these truths felt dangerous, like she was betraying everything she'd worked to become, like she was becoming the very thing she'd tried so hard not to be. But something remarkable happened. The more honest she became with her dark feelings, the less power they had over her. The more she acknowledged her shadow, the less it controlled her from the unconscious. The more she integrated these rejected parts, the more whole and authentic she felt. And when her ex tried his manipulation tactics again, when he attempted to shame her for not being the perfect person she claimed to be, something fundamental had shifted. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She didn't spend hours trying to prove her goodness. She just said, "You're right. I'm not perfect. I'm not always kind. I'm human, which means I'm flawed and complex and sometimes difficult. And that's exactly why I don't need people in my life who can't handle the full truth of who I am." The manipulation stopped working because there was nothing left to manipulate. She'd already owned the parts of herself he was trying to use against her. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming whole, by integrating all parts of yourself, light and dark, together. Not becoming perfect, becoming complete, not transcending your humanity, embracing it fully. Tom discovered this profound shift too, when his mother called again months later with her usual arsenal of shame and guilt. "You'll never change. You're still that angry boy who screamed at me." He found himself responding from a completely different place. Instead of defending against her accusations, he said, "You know what, Mom? You're right. I did scream at you. I was cruel sometimes. I was a hurt teenager who didn't know how else to express my pain. I'm not proud of those moments, but I'm not ashamed of them anymore either. They were part of my journey to becoming who I am now." His mother was silent. For the first time in his life, she had nothing to say, because manipulative people depend on your rejection of your own humanity. When you embrace it instead, their weapons become useless. They're looking for the part of you that will crumble under their accusations. But when you've already accepted and integrated those parts, there's nothing left to crumble. Think about this. What if the parts of yourself you've been most ashamed of are actually your greatest sources of power? What if your anger is really your boundary system trying to protect you? What if your selfishness is really your self-preservation instinct trying to keep you alive? What if your jealousy is really your intuition, showing you what you deeply desire? What if your darkness isn't something to be eliminated, but something to be integrated? Mary learned this lesson the hard way. After months of people-pleasing with her new partner, after shrinking herself smaller and smaller, trying to prove she wasn't too much, she finally reached her breaking point. She started speaking up about her needs without apologizing. She stopped minimizing her emotions to make him comfortable. She embraced what she'd been calling her selfishness and recognized it as healthy self-advocacy. She said things like, "I need more emotional support in this relationship, and if you can't provide that, we need to figure something else out. And my healing journey is important to me, and I won't be with someone who sees it as selfishness. And I am allowed to take up space. I am allowed to have needs. I am allowed to prioritize my well-being." Her partner, He couldn't handle it. He started picking fights, withholding affection, threatening to leave. Because he hadn't been attracted to her wholeness, he'd been attracted to her wound, to the part of her that would abandon herself to make him comfortable. When she stopped playing that role, when she became integrated and real and unmanipulatable, he lost interest. And that's when Mary realized the most powerful truth about shadow work. When you become whole, you naturally repel people who need you to stay broken. The right people? The healthy people are attracted to your authenticity, not your performance. They want to be with the real you, shadow and light together, and light. People think liberation comes from defeating the evil person in your life, but the real liberation comes when that person can no longer touch the parts of you that you once hated about yourself. Carl Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you integrate your shadow, when you bring your rejected parts back home to yourself, your light becomes unshakable. You don't have to be the nicest person in the room to feel worthy. You don't have to be perfect to be lovable. You don't have to perform goodness to belong. You can simply be yourself, complex, flawed, human, and whole. And manipulative people lose their power over you because they no longer know where to attack. They're looking for your rejected parts, your disowned emotions, your secret shames. But when those parts are integrated, when they're welcomed home, when they're part of your conscious identity, there's nothing hidden for predators to exploit. You become like water fluid, adaptable, but impossible to break. Someone tries to shame you for being angry. Yes, I feel anger. It helps me recognize when my boundaries are being crossed. They accuse you of being selfish. I do prioritize my well-being. That's how I have energy to genuinely show up for others. They say you're too sensitive. I am sensitive. It's one of my greatest strengths and sometimes my greatest challenge. No defense, no desperation, just calm ownership of your full humanity. This is what it means to be truly confident, not pretending you're perfect, but knowing you're whole. Stacy described it like this: "I used to be terrified that people would discover I wasn't as good as I appeared to be. Now I just am who I am. Good days and bad days, light moments and shadow moments. And the people who can't handle that aren't my people." The beautiful paradox of shadow integration is this: the more you accept your darkness, the brighter your authentic light becomes. Not the forced light of performance, but the genuine radiance of someone who has nothing left to hide. You stop being afraid of yourself. And when you're not afraid of yourself, you're not afraid of other people's projections either. You become unmanipulatable, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. If you've ever found yourself falling apart, despite knowing all the theories about manipulation and abuse, despite understanding narcissism and gaslighting and trauma, know this: it's not a failure. It's an invitation. An invitation to see the shadow parts of yourself that you're not yet ready to love. It's not the light that makes you invulnerable to manipulation. It's the complete truth of who you are. No hiding, no performing, no needing anyone's permission to exist as a full human being. The narcissist saw your shadow and panicked because it meant you were becoming real. And when you're real, when you're integrated and whole, no one can use your humanity against you anymore. Your shadow isn't your weakness. It's your power coming home. Jung reminds us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who you think you should be, who you truly are. Comment below. What part of your shadow are you finally ready to embrace? And if this spoke to your soul, share it with someone else who's on their journey home to themselves.